Well, good morning. It's a pleasure to be here. I joined many of you last year. How many of you were here last year? Okay. How many of you attended the talk on the Declaration of Independence? Okay, all right. Well, what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about the flags. Mr. Shirtliff had asked me if I could go through a history of the flags. And one of the major reasons to do so, we're here at Camp Constitution, we're discovering our Constitution, we're reading about it and learning about it and all of the cultures and mores that made our country what it is. These flags are very much a symbol of that. What I'm going to do is I have about 8 different flags I want to show you. And a lot of it's going to be Revolutionary War oriented because it was during that era where the flag started to have a national provenance. Before that, they were largely symbols and banners of military actions, monarchies, sometimes ancient republics. But to give you an idea of where we come from and why we have what we have is I want to start out with this particular flag here. Fortunately, Camp Constitution has provided me with 2 other flags I can talk about, so there was no need for me to bring them. Saved me some trouble and saved you folks some time. But does anyone recognize this flag?
Upside down. It's upside down.
Oh, sorry. I'm probably going to have you come up here and help me. Go ahead. Does anybody recognize this flag? Anybody at all? Well, anybody, because everybody here is familiar with the Battle of Lexington and Concord, right? Okay. Well, on the morning of April 19th, this was said to be the only flag flown. There was some documentary evidence for it. I definitely believe it was. This is known as the Bedford flag. Bedford, Massachusetts, just northwest of Lexington, just southeast of Concord. They had this flag. The reason I bring this flag out, this is a very common type of flag from the earlier era. Oops, you know what? I had it right set up before. God, Jack, come on. What happened was, this was, yes, Vince. Well, let me see if I could read my own. Sorry, I did have it upside down. More e vince. Basically, if you can excuse my Latin, it means to conquer or die. And basically what this is it's kind of hard to tell which one's right side up, but you're getting a general idea. Just picture the flag. It is the hand of God, the arm of God, and a sword. So that was a very, very common saying, to conquer or die. Many places in Europe had it. English flags had it. A lot of the Scottish clans would have that kind of saying on it. But this flag was flown, and it was actually, we believe, created in the early 1700s for a troop of horsemen in the Massachusetts Horse Militia Cavalry. And it passed down to Bedford. And they kept it all those years because it was a symbol of pride in the community. It was a symbol of what they were fighting for. And obviously, with the arm of God and the conquer to die, there was really no better explanation and message to deliver on April 19th. So that was the first one I wanted to show you. Now, the second one may be familiar to some of you. You may not quite have ever seen it in this fashion before.
Wow. Denmark.
I have flown this at some of our events before.
Wow.
And some of our left-wing opposition, who normally doesn't like the flag, would yell out, "It's missing the stars! Where are the stars?" Anybody familiar with this flag? Anybody familiar with the Sons of Liberty?
Wow.
This is known as the Sons of Liberty flag. Now, when you see it, what strikes you? What is familiar to you about this flag? Yes?
The 13 stripes.
The 13 stripes. And ever wonder where our flag came from? How we came to the reasoning behind the flag? Well, we're going to go through that right now. In the 1760s, with the Stamp Act Congress, we talked a little about that last year. That was the Congress that convened among the colonies to deal with the Stamp Act that was coming out of Britain. 9 out of the 13 colonies were able to attend. The other 4 supported it, but they were not able to get their delegates there. So the original Sons of Liberty flag was flown in Boston. You can see it at the State House. In fact, if you were at the State House, you may have seen a flag that had 9 vertical red and white stripes. That was the original Sons of Liberty flag. Later on, all 13 colonies were included in that flag, and what you had was what I just showed you here. And that was the basis of, the flag that we ended up with later on. So we're going to get back to that later. We're going to go through the etymology of the flag. So now you know the first part of it. Now, how many of you folks here are local to Massachusetts? Okay, a good number of you. How about New England? All right, a few more. Anybody ever seen this flag before? Oh, okay. Yes. Huh? No, not Vermont. Although Vermont, which technically was part of New York at that point, was certainly included in this to a degree. No. This is known as the Continental Flag. The Continental Flag. Now, if you look at the ensign would be the red background. This was flown from the English ships, later known as British ships, and you would have initially the, in fact, if you look in the back of the room up by Constitution, I'm just going to run back here real quickly. You see the flag that's hanging here. Well, that is actually an incorrect version. The reason it's incorrect is over the years, people have mistaken the color of it because of the engraving, and it led to a natural progression from red to blue. But you picture that St. George's Cross, which is the flag of England even to this day, and it forms the British flag, the center of it. That is what this would look like. You would have the St. George's Cross on this background. The early Puritan settlers in Massachusetts thought that was idolatrous, and they didn't want to have the cross. So the pine tree had become a symbol to them, and they used that as the background. Now, this particular flag was the actual flag flown when the Continental Army had formed. That's why they call it the Continental Flag. Even though it's an old New England flag, it's also known as the flag of New England. This was actually the flag that was flown at Bunker Hill during the Battle of Bunker Hill. Again, symbology is very important. These flags mean something. And when we start going through some of the other flags, I'm sorry? That's a pine tree. That is a pine tree. Now, as time went on, we were fighting in 1775 until July of 1776. We were fighting as a component part of the British Empire, trying to fight for the rights within the British Empire. For those who may be familiar with their English, and we'll call it later on known as British history, although at the time it wasn't known that way, they ended up needing to devise a flag to represent their cause. Well, we recognize the 13 stripes, don't we? They recognize the 13 colonies, the Sons of Liberty flag. What do I have here in the Canton area? Yes?
The British flag.
It's the British flag. Now, you notice the British flag. Is it the same British flag they fly today? No, what's different? Yes? Can you speak up, please? That's correct. If we remember the St. George's Cross up in the corner of the other flag, this one has the St. George's Cross of England superimposed on the St. Andrew's Cross of Scotland, because in 1707, the Parliaments of Scotland and England joined together. And that was the flag that was flown up until early 1801, when the St. Patrick's Cross, which is actually the old Irish flag, was superimposed, and that's the flag we see today for the British. Now, the reason we had this flag was we were not yet ready to declare independence, not because we didn't believe in the cause, but because we were fighting for our rights as Englishmen. And this became our banner. And it's certainly not new in English history to have that happen. It certainly happened in the English Civil War, also to a degree during the Glorious Revolution. So that is the first, let's say, for lack of a better term, collective national flag that we had when we were still provinces and colonies in the early part of the Revolutionary War. Now you may like this one. Anyone ever seen this one before? Oh, I know some of you are very familiar with some of this. Yes, sir, what is it? Have you seen it before? Where did you see it?
I saw this documentary about John Adams.
Oh, okay. Well, it was on there. It would have been on there. This is what they call the pine tree flag. This had been the flag that had been flown in New England before the Continental Flag, actually. You notice the pine tree, and you notice the saying, an appeal to heaven. That had been superimposed on the flag during the early part of the Revolutionary War. Now, as we know, the colonists were very deeply Bible-believing types of individuals, right? This actually came from John Locke in a quote of two treatises. He was quoting from the book of Judges about Jephthah and an appeal to heaven. In other words, after the magistrates, what is the ultimate appeal? It is to heaven. And that's what they were doing. They were telling people, this is who we are, this is who we believe in, this is what we believe in, and we are appealing to heaven because we are certainly not getting any redress over in London through any of the branches of government there, particularly not the monarchy. So this particular flag is also a naval flag. The way this particular flag worked was this was flown off of the Massachusetts vessels, including some of the bomb vessels, they call them, smaller vessels, right around the Bunker Hill time. And for those who have mentioned Maine before, this had also been flown off of the ships in Maine for the first naval battle, called the Battle of Machias in Maine, which at that time was part of Massachusetts. And variations of this flag would be adopted elsewhere too. So a lot of the flags you're going to see were not only flown on land, they were flown at sea, which represented definitely, hello fellows.
Mind if we
Sure, you can do that. I was going to ask for volunteers, but I thought I had it down, but maybe I didn't. The next flag I think I should show you. We're going to move south. June of 1776, even actually before June of 1776, why don't you fellas grab that end, grab that end. Anybody recognize that flag? Does it look familiar to anyone? That is the South Carolina flag in the early part of the Revolutionary War. They had, some people think this is a gorget. If you saw me last year, I was wearing one of these. That was a symbol that officers wore during this time frame. It was also, people believed it was a crescent because the South Carolinian troops from the early colonial days would have that crescent, whether they were officers or enlisted, on their caps. And they would put it on a blue background. Just prior to the major battle in 1776 at Sullivan's Island, which was huge. when the British tried to get into the Carolinas early and failed terribly, they emblazoned the word liberty on here. And it's also known as the Liberty Flag when the word liberty is put on there. And again, now we're at the other end of the colonial geographic spectrum. All up and down the seaboard, you would see flags like that being represented. Thanks, Phyllis. Now what I want to do is show you another naval ensign. This flag is known as the Fort Mifflin flag. Now, you just heard me call it a naval ensign, yet they call that the Fort Mifflin flag. During the Revolutionary War, the American prowess at sea was as great as it was on land, believe it or not. So a lot of it is lost to history. But that particular flag was a naval ensign. In fact, a variation of that was flown on the Bonhomme Richard during the Battle of Flamborough Head with John Paul Jones and other American ships. Benjamin Franklin was said to have a hand in that when he was in Europe. They were trying to design a flag that our ships could fly in addition to what I'm about to show you, because you would have a couple of naval ensigns. The reason that was a Fort Mifflin, Fort Mifflin was much a naval operation as was an army operation. Fort Mifflin sat right in front of Delaware. Philadelphia, right on the river. It was navigable by sea, and it was a major fortress that had to be fought in order for the British to maintain Philadelphia. They already had taken it. Now at this point, Fort Mifflin was checking off the supplies, choking off the supplies. Eventually it would fall, but that was the ensign used because largely it became under naval command, even with the soldiers there. So that's out of the mid-colonies. Now to get back to our older theme, what I am going to do is use the flags that are here, and I'd like to direct your attention to this particular flag there. I am sure everybody recognizes that one. Anybody tell me what that is called? It's called by a few different names.
You're talking about the one with the cross on it or
Can you speak up, please?
which one are you talking about?
The stars and stripes.
Oh, that's Ross.
Yeah, it's known as it's known as the Betsy Ross flag. That's the most popular name for it. Obviously, Betsy didn't create it, but there is no doubt that Betsy was one of the original seamstresses that made flags in Philadelphia. Definitely could have been one of the first to actually make this. There's no question about that. There's been doubt cast on that story. She never created it. It was actually created by a man named Francis Hopkinson, because we have, remember the 13 the stripes we had from the Sons of Liberty? Well, now they needed to replace the canton because now we've declared our independence. July 1776. We no longer are going to fly the British Union in the background and the canton and our flag. The ensign needs another partner. So what did they do? They came up with a blue background. Obviously, blue has a lot of positive colors associated with it, courage and such, fidelity, and the stars. We had 13 stripes. Well, we had 13 colonies. Well, why not have 13 stars? And it was arranged. Obviously, there's always, some historic malpractice out there, and they claim, well, they wouldn't have put them in a circle. Yeah, they would have. They had some in a circle. Did they all look that way? No, they didn't, because today, even with the flag code, there is no specific order the stars have to be in. We see it all up through the Civil War period. You don't have to have them in a specific order. In fact, If you fellas can come back up for me real quick. Okay? You take a look at that. Anybody ever seen that version before? Yes, sir. Where have you seen it? It is. If you mean Union representing the United States early on, yes. It's not a Civil War flag, though. This is a Revolutionary War flag, because how many stars do we have on here? All right, 13. Except in a circle, they go in rows of 3, 2, 3, 2, 3. This would have been more commonly put on the battlefield. You would have seen that flown more often than you would have seen with the circular stars, more practically.
Why so?
It's easier to put together. It's more practical. But the reason being, though, is you saw that more often, but you also did see the circular stars as well. Because in the bicentennial and the centennial, that caught the imagination. That's what we go by. But you would have seen that more at headquarters. Without the stripes, the headquarters flag for the different generals, Washington, Green, so forth, they would have had just the stars on there. Also in the centennial, there were a number of flags that were mistaken, flags that even today we use, obviously that being one in the corner. Another one would be the Bennington Flag, the famous 76. That was created for the centennial. People thought that was a real flag. It was not. Guilford Courthouse in North Carolina, the site of a huge battle, very significant battle for us. They created a flag for the centennial for that in 1881. Also, later on discovered it was created for the centennial. It was not a real flag. So you have what I would call apostate flags out there, but the ones I'm showing you are the actual flags that we had at that point. All right, guys, thank you.
You just saw 1 2 days ago the 15 stars on it.
What I'm going to do, Willie, I'm going to do some questions when I'm done with the flags. Oh, no, we're going to hold the questions till after. In fact, I am going to leave some time for some question and answers because I'm figuring some of you guys may have questions. At least I'm hoping you have some questions. Oh, let's see. I think I have pretty much all the flags here. I want to direct your attention to another flag. This beautiful yellow flag here. I imagine you may be familiar with this. Thank God for the Tea Party movement because it brought back general use of this particular flag. This is known. Does anybody know what this is called, by the way? Yes? Gadsden flag. You know why it's called that? Christopher Gadsden, statesman out of South Carolina, ran a privateer. He actually was a privateer, a naval officer in the 7 years French-Indian War, also a colonel of South Carolina militia, had designed that flag. Now, did he come up with the idea of the symbology? No, he did not. Does anybody know who helped really put that symbology together? Who? That's right. Any of the students know? No? It was Ben Franklin. The Coiled Snake. During, we talked about the Stamp Act Congress. Even before that, during the French-Indian War, when the colonies were trying to put their effort together, because the British Army could only do so much. They did quite a bit, actually, in the Navy, but we needed to do our part, too, to defend ourselves and help with the other fights in the Empire. They came together, and it was, they called it join or die, meaning that we had to come together to fight together or we would die, and that's where they had the Coiled Snake. Now, the reason this particular mix came together, so to speak, symbology came together, was you had that. Later on, during the Revolutionary War, we had the don't tread on me, because obviously with a rattlesnake, you don't step on them. You step on a rattlesnake, you're going to get bitten. The poison bite will probably kill you, and has in many cases. So that is why that was put on there, the don't tread on me. Obviously, that may have come from Franklin as well, actually. So you put the two of those together. Now you take a look at the yellow portion of it. The yellow portion of it comes from a drum. The Marine Corps had started in Philadelphia, in late fall of 1775. And they were authorized in October, but they actually came together in November. And when they were beating the drum for the initial recruits, that was on the drum. The yellow drum with the flag, with the snake, and the slogan, "Don't tread on me." Gadsden, who was sitting in Philadelphia at the time, saw that, and they said, well, what are we going to do to create an ensign for the commander-in-chief of the naval forces, which was Isaac Hopkins. He was the commodore, permanent rank they had set for him for that. They came up with that flag. So that flag was flown by the head of the Continental Navy. Again, it's another naval ensign. Also was adopted on land. Culpeper, Virginia, the Minutemen from Culpeper County, Patrick Henry's county, they developed a variation of that flag, and you would see different militia groups throughout the colony or the states at that point with that particular symbol on their flag. So that's where those flags come from. Pretty much wanted to go through how that happened. The other thing too, we have the Flag Act of June 14, 1777. When we had the Stars and the Stripes, that was authorized by the Flag Act. Prior to that, Congress had authorized other flags to use, as we had spoken of before, but that particular act we call and we celebrate today as Flag Day actually established our first independent national flag and ensign. So that gives you an idea of the development of the flag, the symbology behind it, but more importantly, the meaning behind it. These flags were very valuable. Many of you may have read in your histories that when men would go into battle, they would die before they would give up those flags. Those flags, in many cases, were locally made, represented, like in the case of Bedford, although it wasn't made in Bedford, it became part of Bedford community. You would die before you would surrender that flag. And it became the same with the other flags that were there, particularly our national colors. You don't let it touch the ground. You grab it. And it's because of what it represented. And you saw with the appeal to heaven, the meaning behind what they had there and what they were fighting for and what they wanted to do and how they wanted to do it. So what I'm going to do is I will stop right here and I will entertain some questions anybody may have. I hope you have a few of them.
That when a new state was added, they added a stripe as well as a star. And that there were 15 stripes on the flag for a time, and then they went back to am I correct?
You are correct.
Yeah.
You are correct. I was going to bring the Star Spangled Banner in, but I wasn't sure if I'd have the time to go through it. What Mr. McManus is referring to is what they did in the early days of the Republic. Obviously, from the constitutional courses that I witnessed here and that I know by reading the Constitution, how states were admitted to the Union. Because we had the 13 stars and 13 stripes, the next two states to come in would have been Vermont and Tennessee. So what they did was they added, and Kentucky, and what they did was they added a star and a stripe for each one of those particular states. After the War of 1812, when more states had come into the Union in a faster way, they discovered that the flag was going to be too large, the stripes were going to be too small, it was not going to be practical to have. So they reverted back to the 13 stripes, but they would increase the number of stars. And as we remember, there is no authorized code for the actual placement of the stars. They just have to be on the canton, in the Union, and in the blue background in the corner. So that is true. Yes?
Betsy, on the appeal to heaven, was that a pine tree or was that like a tree?
It was a pine tree. And the reason it was a pine tree because it was native here to Massachusetts in particular. It had been used as a symbol for some of the tribes around here, but I don't think that was the main reason they used it. It just became a symbol of their community. And they wanted to use it. They didn't feel comfortable using the cross, particularly the St. George's cross, which would have predominated at that time. But they were definitely much into godly scriptural references, which is why you see that. And keep in mind, John Locke, that's where they got it from, but they did it because of the biblical references, and obviously he used it as a biblical reference, is why it got their attention. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Professor Soon asked earlier, we saw a flag that had
15 stars on it. I think they mentioned so that way the stars could be a little bit bigger. But yeah, is there any other reason?
Is that your question, Willie?
I think he answers it because we saw 13 stripe and 15 star, which is really odd. We saw one that I
Yes,
think
there
Tom
was.
Moore put it up. Yeah.
Yeah, Tom had it. I have one, he has one. That was the question Mr. McManus had asked.
Yeah, more or less.
Yeah, what had happened was, and it actually is going to lead me to something else. But yes, what happened because of the states entering the Union, they just kept the practice of adding a stripe for each state as well as a star until it became untenable. Part of it was nobody realized how quickly the country was going to grow. I think that may have been part of it. And two, last thing anybody thought about is, okay, when we put this flag code together, what happens when we bring in other states? There were more important things to discuss. Days of triviality are more within our memory, you know? The other thing I want to talk about with your question is the stars. The stars themselves, there's no code as to how they're supposed to look. 5 points on a traditional star. We've seen a 6-pointed star, multi-pointed stars. They're also authentic, but obviously the more traditional, the more sensible one would be the stars that, you know, have the 5 points. It's okay, that's good. I can stay up. Any other questions you folks may have? Because there are a couple of things I can address in the meantime. And if you have anything, just feel free because we're in question and answer session technically. But you take a look. I want you to look at this flag here. That flag, variation flag, you notice in the blue corner, in the Canton area, very similar to the stars and setup that I showed you with the other stars and stripes that were flown largely on the battlefields. You are going to see a lot of flags like that one. I must confess at the moment I'm not sure whose flag that particular one belongs to, but I do know the Green Mountain Boys in Vermont had a flag like that one, except it was a green ensign, and they would have those stars in the background. The state of Rhode Island, with their Rhode Island anchor, which represents the state of Rhode Island, and Providence Plantations, would have that too. So you would see many states with their regiments adopt that in the background. We talked about the naval ensigns. Well, the naval ensign as well, sometimes you would have, you know, led the tradition of having the stars alone just flown off of the ships. Sometimes you would see that as well in addition to the other ensigns that we had. So when you're taking a
I
look
don't
at
know
these,
if anybody pick up this. I mean, this arrangement makes it look more three-dimensional than two-dimensional. You see the spherical, the one to the front, it look more to your front than the outer one towards the back.
stars?
It looks very three-dimensional to me, the arrangement of that particular pattern.
Yeah, oh, you mean the design or the stars?
Yeah.
The design, yeah.
The arrangement, yeah.
Yeah, the design
More
does.
three-dimensional to me.
The design
I don't know
definitely
if you
does.
see it. It's really a very good one.
Even though it's furrowed a little bit, yes.
Yeah.
That's a very, very, very good one. Also, too, as the flag has developed over the years, you're going to notice that it really hasn't changed much. It's still pretty much the same. I mean, practicalities, again, rule today, we still have our 13 stripes. Anytime we add a new state, you know, we have room on the flag for it, unless we ever double the number of states we have, then I'm wondering what we're going to do. Doesn't look like we're going to have that problem anytime too soon. Last time we entered a state was in 1960, and prior to that was 1959, and prior to that was 1912. Anybody else have any questions on the flags themselves or the history behind it? Yes?
I'm curious how they were made and what they're made of originally.
Good question. And not just here. This would have been the case all over. You would have had cloth. It could have been cotton. It would have ever been. But one thing I must confess to being is I am pretty well versed at the clothing, but that's not my area of expertise, the cloth and such. But you would have had linens, cottons, that kind of mix. They would have been put into that kind of situation. They certainly had it. You know, we were not lacking or wanting for a lot of goods. Certainly in wartime things will happen that will create a bit of a lack, but we were remarkably industrious. so industrious that we had an ironworks in Saugus, just, north of the harbor area back in the 1600s. So Philadelphia was a leading city, not just in America, but in the British Empire. And obviously with the seat of Congress being there, certainly they would have been at the forefront of making those, and they would have had all the materials they needed. Again, talking about Betsy Ross, the reason she became famous was her grandnephew had published a story around the centennial, talked about her creating the flag, and that's when it took off. Nobody was really left alive from the Revolutionary War, so when they would have these stories that sort of went off the rails a little bit, not maliciously, but just go off the rails, there was nobody there to contradict it. Today we go back, we have better forensics, and one thing we can do better today is go back and find out through forensics where somebody was buried, find this, find fragments. They couldn't do that in 1875, 76. But then on the other hand, it went to the point where Betsy Ross never did much of anything, which was not true at all. Betsy Ross was one of the main seamstresses in Philadelphia. She did work there. Her uncle was Francis Hopkinson, who did design the flag. So she was there, and if anybody has a claim to actually sewing the first flag, it was probably her. And that's what the story was that passed down through the family, and it kind of was embellished. Yes?
Certainly within feedback, when you had the mechanic on the ends, with that separate piece of cloth, embroidered on an entire rectangle, or you would actually see, this of course was all done by hand, like sand.
Oh, you mean along the border of the flag?
Rectangle, and then put another piece of cloth on each side.
Oh, right. That I am not sure of how they actually constructed it. My impression was it was the one piece that they put together. However, your question is really good because that brings up another subject. I had the Bedford flag up a few minutes ago. Now, that's a reproduction, obviously. It doesn't even have what the entire flag did because that had a fringe on it originally. Some of these flags would have a fringe on it. And the granddaughter of the man who carried it into battle at Lexington Conquer, when she was a young lady, took the fringe off it and made a dress with it. And she claimed to regret it afterwards because when they discovered the significance of the flag, and she lost the dress and the fringe, so they couldn't put it back. So when they did forensics on the flag, they found one piece of that fringe left, hidden in the flag, and they could determine exactly what it was. The other part of your question that's very germane is they would have another piece where you would actually slit it down when you would carry it on the pole. It's not like today where we have gravits like I have on these reproductions. You would have another piece that would actually go on the other side that would hold that flag together. Yes?
So, what's the deal with today that people try to find the flag and not stand for it or whatever? What's the status today?
Of the flag. Well, it's interesting you say that because when we had the Liberty groups pop up around 2009, and maybe a few years before that, what flags were they flying? They weren't flying the flags from World War, I don't mean the national flag, because that's always pretty much been the same. But they weren't flying banners from World War II, World War I, the Civil War. They were flying banners from the Revolutionary War. So today the Gadsden flag, despite media disapproval, has a great provenance among most of the people out there for its significance and also because of what it means today. It hasn't lost its meaning. That's the odd thing. Not even odd, it's interesting, it's providential. It has not lost its meaning in all these years. The significance for the flags, they are coming back. One of the things I do is, in addition to lecturing, I'm a living historian and I do a lot of reenactments, and I notice the crowds at these fields, mostly Revelry, not exclusively. They grow. They grow in significance. They want to learn about this because they don't learn about it in public school. And what they learn about in public school, we don't have to go into details on that. We know what they're learning. So, if your question is, what is the significance or how do people feel about it today? I think by and large they feel good about it. For that 20% of the population we have that never likes us is never going to like us. They're going to hate it. You can tell by the way they treat it, And the more they hate it, the more you can tell it has meaning. That's an odd thing too. But I would say by and large the public has really rediscovered in the last 10 years or so, 10, 15 years, what these symbols mean. Because now they've come to life again. Yes, Dr. Soon.
I want to raise an issue on two issues, political correctness. We actually have flags put on the moon, yes? And then during Pioneer 10 and Pioneer 11 satellite, which actually the distance we already went beyond what they call the heliopause. That's about, I would say, 100 to 200 AU, the distance of the sun distance. It's already out there. But during that time, I mean, we're not putting, there's no flag on those satellites, perhaps. It's all just a flag that is whatever, universal, human, whatever. We're not even allowed, but we are the one that built this instrument. We are the one that went there and put the thing there. I think we deserve to have our flag there.
Oh, I agree. I definitely agree.
Especially the one on the moon.